In 1238, the King of France spent his nation's entire annual budget on a single fragile item. He didn't buy a new army, a grand naval fleet, or a neighboring province for his crown. He bought an old, thorny wreath that was supposedly worn by a man 12 centuries prior. In the Middle Ages, pieces of dead people were the most expensive and liquid assets on the planet. An entire empire was liquidated and destroyed just to control the market for these holy commodities. I am the chief auditor of the Bureau, and today we are studying the most profitable business model of the medieval era. Open your financial reports, because we are auditing the largest armed robbery in recorded human history. To understand this heist, we must examine the brutal macroeconomic reality of the religious artifact market. In the Middle Ages, the physical remains of a saint were the ultimate high-yield financial investment. A city possessing a famous martyr's skull automatically became a Tier 1 international tourist destination. Millions of pilgrims traveled thousands of miles to deposit massive donations at these localized shrines. Owning a fragment of the true cross was essentially a license to print infinite tax-free revenue. This asset class created a secondary market of toll roads, luxury inns, and aggressive souvenir merchants. Kings built massive stone cathedrals simply to serve as fancy display cases for a single holy tooth. Relics were the most liquid and highly valued physical assets across the entire European marketplace. Naturally, this massive market demand triggered an explosion of absolute and total historical counterfeits. Monasteries suddenly discovered glass jars, allegedly containing the breath of Christ or the Virgin Mary's milk. At one point, there were at least 4 separate skulls of John the Baptist circulating in Europe. Each one claimed to be the original, and each one collected massive fees from gullible religious investors. Let's talk about the competition for exclusive rights, like the infamous case of the Holy Prepuce. At least 12 different European churches claimed to own this specific biological relic at the same time. Each institution hired medieval lawyers to prove their version was the only genuine biological asset. This wasn't about theology. It was a desperate battle for market share and pilgrim foot traffic. If a rival monastery found a better bone, your local economy could collapse overnight from lack of tourists. To stay competitive, desperate monks would often engage in pious theft to steal assets from other cities. This practice was so common it had a professional name, Furta Sacra, or the strategic heist of the sacred. But the greatest and most authentic vault of religious capital was locked inside the Byzantine Empire. Constantinople was the Silicon Valley of relics, holding 90% of the world's most valuable artifacts. Now, enter the Republic of Venice and its ruthless, blind CEO, the Doge Enrico Dandolo. Venice was a maritime merchant empire that cared only about trade monopolies and quarterly profit margins. In 1202, a massive army of French crusaders arrived in Venice to rent a fleet of transport ships. Doge Dandolo built the ships, but the crusaders realized they had zero gold to pay the bill. The crusaders officially defaulted on their massive naval contract before they even left the Venetian port. Most leaders would cancel the deal, but Dandolo saw a way to weaponize this enormous armed debt. He agreed to defer the payments if the Crusaders helped Venice conquer its commercial rivals first. This desperate Crusader army essentially became a private collection agency for the Venetian Republic's interests. They quickly sacked the Christian city of Zara just to pay down the interest on their transport debt. But Doge Dandolo had his sights set on the ultimate prize, the Byzantine capital of Constantinople. Constantinople was the wealthiest city in the world and the largest repository of high-value holy relics. By manipulating a Byzantine succession crisis, Venice steered the entire Crusader fleet toward the capital. The Crusaders demanded a massive payout from the emperor, which the Byzantine treasury could not afford. When the Byzantine government failed to pay the invoice, the horrific siege of 1204 officially began. The Crusaders broke through the ancient walls and subjected the city to 3 days of systematic looting. They stripped the gold leaf from the Hagia Sophia and melted bronze statues into worthless base coins. But the Venetians were smarter. They knew the long-term wealth was hidden in the city's sanctuaries. Venetian merchants methodically looted every church, stealing thousands of high-value relics and martyr bones. They extracted these sacred artifacts and shipped them back to Europe to flood the religious market. Venice established a total monopoly on the global distribution of these stolen, high-demand sacred assets. They didn't just steal the bones, they created a sophisticated certification system to prove their authenticity. Venetian bankers provided the legal paperwork to ensure these stolen goods maintained their high market value. This was a classic corporate raid, where the shareholders were murdered and the inventory was liquidated. Venice used these stolen bones as diplomatic leverage to negotiate trade deals with every European monarch. They would gift a martyr's arm to a French king in exchange for lucrative maritime tax exemptions. They even stole the bronze horses from the hippodrome to decorate the front of St. Mark's Basilica. The political aftermath of this corporate raid was an absolute economic catastrophe for the Crusaders. They crowned a new emperor in Constantinople, but his new empire was already completely and totally bankrupt. To keep the government lights on, the new emperor was forced to pawn his remaining holy relics. He literally pawned the legendary Crown of Thorns to a Venetian bank to secure a massive loan. This was the ultimate subprime mortgage crisis, where the collateral was the most sacred object in Christendom. The Venetians kept the crown in a high-security vault, while charging the emperor compounding interest rates. When the emperor could not pay the debt, King Louis IX of France stepped in as the buyer. The Venetians charged interest rates that would make a modern payday lender look like a saint. The French king paid a sum larger than the entire annual budget of France to buy the crown. To maximize the marketing impact, the king walked barefoot for miles, carrying the relic into Paris. This was a masterclass in PR. Turning a massive financial expenditure into a legendary act of devotion. He then built the Sainte-Chapelle in Paris just to house this one incredibly expensive thorny asset. The construction cost of the church was actually lower than the price of the relic itself. Think about that. The box was cheaper than the contents, because the contents generated eternal revenue. This single purchase turned Paris into the new spiritual headquarters of Europe, bypassing the Roman market. The Fourth Crusade destroyed the Eastern Roman Empire just to settle a logistical shipping debt to Venice. The Crusaders returned home in disgrace, but the Venetians secured total control of the Mediterranean trade routes. The Republic of Venice successfully weaponized religious zealotry into an aggressive territorial expansion strategy. They proved that Crusader faith was temporary, but a monopoly on regional trade was a permanent win. The physical bones of dead martyrs became the international currency that financed the Venetian Golden Age. By hoarding the sacred, they completely dominated the secular markets of the entire medieval world. Constantinople never recovered, but Venice became the wealthiest financial hub in the history of Europe. You have now successfully completed your audit of the great 1204 Constantinople relic heist. If your government ever hires a Venetian logistics firm, you should probably count your national treasures. Your assignment is to go into the comments and identify a modern market based on artificial value. What is the 21st century equivalent of taking out a loan to buy a fake saint's bone? Is it modern art, digital currency, or perhaps an overpriced and useless university degree? Defend your financial thesis below, and I might choose not to audit your personal bank account. Subscribe to the channel immediately, or I will sell your workstation to a Venetian merchant for parts. Click the notification bell to ensure you are present for our next audit of historical financial disasters.